I'm gonna love you.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge. Today I'm going to continue covering famous and classic games, and I have a good one for you today. Today we're going to be covering Viktor Korchnoi versus Anatoly Karpov, and I've covered one of their games previously. Today's game is going to be the 1978 FIDE Championship game, game number 17. And this game here had a lot of controversy before the actual game started. If you know the dynamics between the two players, it was very intense. It was very hostile. You have to remember that Korchnoi defected to the West. He didn't want to be a part of the Soviet Union any longer. And Karpov, on the other hand, he was like the Soviet Union's prized pupil. You know, he was everything that the Soviet Union stood for, and he was like their model citizen almost. You know, so they were on the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of ideology and how they just looked at the world, and so they didn't like each other at all. And they didn't even shake hands at the opening ceremony, and it was a real dislike. And according to what happened in this game, before the actual game started, there was a doctor in the audience. He was actually a hypnotist, and I guess Korchnoi spotted him out. He was sitting in the front row, in one of the front rows, and Korchnoi went to the organizers and said, "Hey, this guy's got to go. I'm not playing if he's in the audience. If he's this close, I'm not playing." And after some delegation, they all agreed to move everyone in the audience back to like the 7th row, and that was okay for Korchnoi. But they tried to get him to remove his sunglasses, because he was playing with sunglasses, and they were like, "Well, if we move the hypnotist out of here, then you got to take your sunglasses off, and you can't play with them." So it was a lot of back and forth, and in that time, he actually lost 10 minutes on his clock, because when the round starts, the round starts. It doesn't matter if you're if you're not happy with what's going on or not. Like the time is set to start at a certain time, and if you're not happy, then hey, your time is still going to tick. So the fact that he lost 10 minutes right out the gate because he was arguing with the organizers plays a big factor in this game, because he was under time pressure, under the critical points of this game. So let's go ahead and dive right in and see what unfolded on the board. Korchnoi was white. He played c4. Knight f6, knight c3, e6, d4, and bishop b4. Now right here you have a transposition into the Nimzo-Indian, and the Nimzo was named after the great Aaron Nimzovich, and we've all studied his teachings, and one of the books that he put out is called My System. And if you haven't read that book there, you need to get it, because that's one of the classics and one of the best chess books that you can have. After I read My System, I probably gained about 200 to 300 rating points within the next couple months. So it's essential reading for a chess player. E3. This here is evolving into the Rubinstein variation of the Nimzo-Indian, and the idea here is to play bishop d3, knight ge2. Then when black captures the knight on c3, white can recapture with the knight, so that doesn't destroy his pawn structure. And then white would like to also play e4, and with the bishop being on d3, that's going to help him be able to do that. So that's the Rubinstein variation of the Nimzo-Indian. Castle, Bishop D3, C5, D5. Now D5 here is attempting to take up space in the center and try to cramp black. B5. This is a direct reaction to that because Karpov is like, hey, I'm going to sack this pawn here. I'm going to give you this pawn, but then I'm going to get the big center and I'm going to be able to develop my pieces more freely. You have D takes E, F takes E. At this point, black has the semi-open F file and they're going to have a big center. At this point here now, Korchnoi accepts the sacked pawn on B5. And then Karpov plays A6. Now this here looks like, like a Benko gambit where black gives up the pawns on the A and B file in order to put a lot of pressure on the pawns, white's pawns on A and B. So this is looking very much like how play continues in like a Benko gambit. Knight GE2, D5, Karpov strikes in the center with this big center. Right now he just wants to pawn roll right over. Castles, E5, big center. It's very impressive. A3 puts the question to the bishop. And then A takes B actually stops Korchnoi from taking the bishop. Because if you look and see, the rook here is undefended. So if he takes the bishop, then Karpov just takes the white rook. Bishop takes B. Bishop takes the knight. And then right here, Korchnoi captured with the pawn instead of capturing with the knight. At first glance, you would say, hey, why did he voluntarily destroy his pawn structure like that? But looking at the position on the board, you can see that the pawn on C3 is going to be able to help when black starts to push his big pawn center. So the pawn there is actually better than having the knight there. Bishop A6. Rook B1 protects the bishop. And now you have Queen D6 getting closer to the action, closer to the C5 pawn. If he would have played bishop takes, rook takes, then the knight protects here with knight B D7. If you notice, white's position here is better. White will play A4 to shore up the rook there. The rook's putting pressure on the C5 pawn, but white is a little bit better here. So that's why Karpov played Queen D6 because now he can protect his pawn center with his queen and have his queen closer to the action. C4. This is like a break move here to try to attempt to break up black's big center. D4 push. Knight G3 is eyeing the squares E4 and F5. Black finally develops his queenside knight. A4 solidifies the bishop on B5. Knight A5 is putting pressure on the C4 pawn. Queen D3 reinforces it. Queen E6 puts more pressure on that C4 pawn. That's where the action is going down right there on that C4 square. So E takes D stops black from capturing on the C4 square. C takes D. C5 pushing so he can preserve his pawn. Rook FCA hits the pawn. F4. This is an attempt to still break up that pawn center that Karpov has. rook takes, bishop takes, and queen takes. Now, if the queen takes was forced because he could have took with the rook, but that would have been a mistake because after the rook takes, you have check. If the king goes out into the king goes out to the seventh rank, now you have bishop a3. Rook hits the queen, and now you have checkmate. Rook f8 is checkmate. If he would have blocked with rook c8, then you have rook takes rook, queen takes, and pawn takes, and then black center is completely obliterated. So then white would just be better here. So that's why Karpov had to take the bishop with the queen. So it's the queen trade, queen takes, rook takes. Now here white is slightly better, but it's still anybody's game right here. Bishop a3 hits the rook. The rook scoots over to protect the pawn on e5 because it was under attack by the pawn on f4. Knight f5 is a good aggressive move there. It's threatening forks on e7. King moves up. F takes. Rook takes. And now you have rook b5. Now, in the game, knight c4 was played, but white was hoping that the rook would take. Rook takes rook. Pawn takes, and the rook comes over to b6, and then the knight takes. Now, what you have here, the resulting position is that now white has a much better passed pawn. That passed pawn on b5 is a lot better than that pawn that was on a4, and this will be easier. This will be like an easier continuation for Korchnoi to try to advance his pawn and promote his pawn. But in the game, knight c4 was played. Rook b7, check. It could have went rook takes e5, knight takes rook, and knight d4, and then a rook takes the outside pass pawn. Karpov was kind of hoping for this line here because this line here will lead to a draw. As you can see, it's a material balance. There's not much left to play for here. This would lead to a draw here, but that didn't happen in the game. King e6, knight d4, check, and that finally wipes out Karpov's big center. So his big center has finally been obliterated. King d5, knight f3 hits the rook. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes rook. King takes knight. At the end of this line here, white has won a rook, whereas black won the bishop on a3 and the knight on e5. But Korchnoi felt like this was the best line and the best continuation for the end game. He felt like he had a better chance winning this end game, giving up the two pieces for the rook. Rook e7, king d4, and then I also have to say that at this point in the game, Korchnoi was under time trouble, so he wasn't necessarily making the best moves because of the time trouble, and this can be attributed back to the fact that he started with 10 less minutes than Karpov, because Korchnoi was arguing with the the organizers. Rook takes g7 is what Korchnoi played in the game. A better continuation might have been rook d1, followed by king c3, rook c7 check, king b3, and now rook takes the g pawn. And what the whole purpose was of those rook checks was to drive the black king far away to the edge of the board, and then white can work on winning the h pawn without having the king all up in the mix. So in the game, though, Korchnoi went ahead and he took the g pawn right away. Karpov played knight c4. Now you have rook f4. At this point here, Korchnoi only had 6 minutes left to play 6 moves before the next time control would start. Blocks with knight e4. Check, rook d7. King e3. Look how close Karpov's king is to the white king in the white side of the board. He's using his king as a very active piece, which is one principle that we tell beginners, and we tell anyone looking to improve in chess. We say once the end game starts, get your king active as possible. Don't be defensive with your king. Be active with it. Use it as an active piece. And that's exactly what Karpov did in this game. Rook f3 check, king e2. Korchnoi grabbed that other pawn. Now you have knight c d2. All of Karpov's pieces are very, very close to Korchnoi's king here. The rook slides over to a3 to protect his pawn because his pawn is under attack. You have rook c6. Now rook c6 is threatening checkmate on rook c1 next move. So Korchnoi, in time pressure, drops back to rook a1, thinking that, hey, this here, solves my problem. This here is going to prevent, black from checkmating me next move. But actually, he just walked right into a forced mate. The move that he should have played was g3. He should have played g3, but he walked right into a forced mate there. g3 in the board here, as you can see, gives his king luft. So if black would have played rook c1, he would have been able to run up to the g2 square. But instead, he played rook a1, which allowed black to play this tricky tactic of knight f3 check. Now here, if king goes over to h1, then you have checkmate with knight f2. And then if the king, if white takes the knight with g takes knight, then you have rook g6 check. King moves over, and then again, knight f2 checkmate. So Korchnoi actually resigned after Karpov played knight f3 right here. He just gave up and resigned. It was forced. There was nothing he could do. So this was a game that he should not have lost. He was winning for a lot of this game here. And it was devastating. And even the people in the audience picked up on how devastating it was. After the game was over, a lot of people in the audience were still sitting in their seats in total disbelief that Korchnoi actually lost this game. But hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.